This morning, we're going to take a deep dive into the social media platforms that profit from grabbing onto and monetizing our attention to the tune of billions of dollars a year and with almost no regulation. A majority agree social media's influence on our democracy and our national security is a big problem. 64% of Americans believe social media has been a bad thing for our democracy, 2/3 of the country, creating polarization and division and eroding civility in our politics. All of this according to a new Pew survey. It's an attention economy whose business model depends simply on persuading you that you and your way of life is somehow under attack in order to buy your time and attention, as whistleblowers from these companies have come to Capitol Hill to warn us about.
I'm reminded of one conversation with an executive when I said, I am confident that we have a foreign agent, and their response was, well, since we already have one, what does it matter if we have more? Let's keep growing the office.
And rather than address the serious issues raised by its own research, Meta leadership chooses growing the company over keeping people safe.
During my time at Facebook, I came to realize a devastating truth. Almost no one outside of Facebook knows what happens inside of Facebook.
85% of Americans say social media makes it easier to manipulate people with misinformation. We've seen it from Russian efforts to influence the presidential election to QAnon. In fact, one 2019 report tracking a dummy social media account set up to represent an anonymous conservative mother in North Carolina found that Facebook's recommendation algorithms led her to QAnon in less than a week. And then there's the thriving anti-vaccine groups that the president himself called out last year.
On COVID misinformation, what's your message to platforms like Facebook? They're killing people.
Facebook was used by members of Myanmar's military in a systematic campaign as a tool for genocide. And social media platforms from Facebook to Twitter were gasoline on the fire of the Capitol attack on January 6. A whopping 79% of Americans say the internet and social media have made Americans more politically divided. Growing shares of both Republicans and Democrats say members of the other party are more immoral, dishonest, and closed-minded than other Americans. Perhaps it's because they only hear about the other party via social media and not normal interactions like we used to have in the pre-social media world. And social media companies are profiting off of Americans' anger online. Starting in 2017, Facebook's ranking algorithm treated angry emoji reactions as 5 times more valuable than likes. Why? Well, anger generates clicks, and clicks generate profit. What's happening on social media is the equivalent of using the same pipes for your drinking water and the sewer system.
The better you are at innovating a new way to be divisive, we will pay you in more likes, followers, and retweets. Has partisanship in television and radio pre-existed social media? Yes. Have we ever wired up the most powerful artificial intelligence in the world, pointed at your brainstem, to show you the most enraging content on a daily basis, and the longer you scroll, the more you get? We have never done that before.
We are experimenting on brains, America. And the business has never been bigger. When Pew began tracking social media adoption in 2005, just 5% of American adults used at least one of these platforms. Now, the number is 72%. 82% of Americans are on YouTube, 70% are on Facebook. And ready for this? 4 of these companies have more than 1 billion worldwide users. That's more than the population of every country in the world but 2. None of these companies has a financial incentive to change. Social networking sites in the United States brought in more than $72 billion last year.
The reality is our country is deeply divided right now, and that isn't something that tech companies alone can fix.
For us, it's much more important to sort of look at like the big ideas that might influence the way that tech evolves in the future, and more importantly, to build a strategy that does not rely on government intervention for our success.
Twitter has become kind of the de facto town square, it's just really important that people have both the reality and the perception that they are able to speak freely within the bounds of the law.
So we invited Meta, Twitter, Google, Snap, and TikTok onto this broadcast to defend their practices and simply have a conversation about the future of their platforms and what can be done here. All of them declined. We did receive a statement from TikTok, and we got links to previously written blog posts from the other companies. The last real legislation that spells out who is legally responsible for content on the internet was signed into law 27 years ago. The last century. In 1996, only a fifth of Americans had ever booted up the World Wide Web. Section 230, as it's known, says, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as a publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. In other words, these companies are not to be held liable for harmful or inaccurate content a user posts on their sites and can't be sued. Of course, the question is, the minute they use an algorithm, do they actually become a publisher? This law was written before the algorithms had taken hold. Now, in Washington, Section 230 is under more scrutiny than ever, with more than 30 bills proposed on social media during the last Congress. But despite all those bills proposed, none of them have passed. 24 years ago, 46 states and Big Tobacco reached the largest settlement of civil litigation claims in U.S. history. And tobacco companies changed their marketing practices and paid states more than $200 billion in restitution. When we realize products are toxic for us, we pass laws to change them, or we hold companies accountable in a court of law to force the change. Facebook whistleblower and former data scientist Frances Haugen became one of the greatest sources this century when she turned over thousands of confidential company documents, sharing them with regulators, journalists, and with lawmakers.
When we realized Big Tobacco was hiding the harms it caused, the government took action. When we figured out cars were safer with seatbelts, the government took action. And when our government learned that opioids were taking lives, the government took action. I implore you to do the same here.
Welcome back. Data download time. Social media's impacts are felt all around the world. But Pew Research Center's new Global Attitude Survey shows that the United States is actually an outlier in how Americans perceive social media's impacts on democracy. Bottom line, Americans are a lot more skeptical. Social media's impact on democracy, a bad thing? 35% around the world say it's a bad thing, but here in the United States, 64% say it's been a bad thing. How about whether it's made us more divided? There's a little more continuity. 65% around the world, 79% here in America. Are we now less civil? 46% globally agree with that. 69% believe that here in the United States. And how about social media? Does it make you more informed? Globally, people think it does, 73% versus Americans at 64%. But despite our skepticism, as Americans, we're using this more and more. Look at this. In 2012, about half of Americans were using social media. Now, essentially 3/4. And look at this, by age group, 18 to 30, this won't surprise. I'd like to know who the 16% who don't use social media are, but 84% of folks under 30, 81% 30 to 50, and even 60% of those folks 50 plus. So we may not like it, but we're becoming more addicted